there, Stacey. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to having a great conversation. So welcome to everyone as well.
Yes, us too. We're so looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for being with us. I think we can dive right into it, Stacey. And we wanted to start there by asking you a little bit more about this research that you conduct every year with Sapient Insights. It's a global research initiative that assesses the adoption of HR systems and practices and the practices organizations use to support those systems. Can you just maybe start by telling us a little bit more about who participates, about the research, and the why behind it?
Yeah, thank you. And I know it's a mouthful, so I appreciate that, trying to figure out all the words that go into it. So this research has been conducted under a lot of different brands and names, but it's the same research for the last 24 years. So people might know it under Hunter Group, Cedar Consulting, Sierra Cedar. You might have heard all of those names, but really today it is known as the Sapient Insights Annual HR System Survey, and we have a finance one that goes out as well every year. But the really exciting thing for me, I've been doing it for the last 7 years. And the person before me did it for 17 years. We have continuously asked the HR community around what are they doing with HR technology? How are they delivering it? How are they adopting it? What are the tools and techniques they're using to get the most out of it? And that covers everything from your core HRMS and payroll to your talent management systems to your wellness systems now we've added this year, right? To health and safety. And emerging technologies like blockchain and, new benchmarking technologies. So it really is a very sort of extensive research effort that's been done year over year now. And as I always tell people is, you take it and you share what information you're comfortable sharing. But the idea is that it becomes a voice of the community. We share that information back in aggregate. Anyone who has insights into their company's HR technology environment, whether that's your HR generalist or your HRIT professional, or maybe it's even a talent and recruiting or learning professional who works in those technologies, you get an opportunity to give user experience and vendor satisfaction ratings. It's kind of an opportunity to say, hey, I like this or I don't, and have the market as a whole see an aggregate view. So we're really proud of it. We really hope to honor the community by making sure that it continues to be something that's done year over year. And we're heading into our silver anniversary. So I'm not sure, what is it that you get for that, right? Is that supposed to be something special? I don't know. What we're going to see next year. So
I think you should think of something special because it's definitely something that should be celebrated, right? 25 years.
No, 25 years of sort of asking about, and being able to trend what's happening in HR technology. Yeah, we realize how special it is, which is why we take very good care of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we should invite you back next year for the 25th anniversary and have another episode, Stacey.
I would love that. I would be very happy to come back and talk about it. Yeah.
Awesome. One of the most highly anticipated findings from your research each year is your Voice of the Customer charge. They share feedback provided by HR system buyers and administrators on specific solutions. What are some of the key themes that you heard this year from the HR system customers?
It's really exciting because we get thousands of people who participate in the research, and then we clean the data extensively. So I go in and with my team and we validate to make sure, like, if someone's giving a user experience, are they actually a customer, right? So we do a lot of validation like that. So last year we had over 1,900 organizations that we validated, participated in the research, and had solid answers. And what we found was that, particularly being 2020, right? 2020 was such a year for everyone. And the survey is out generally every year in May and June. So it was the beginning of what was probably the scariest, sort of environment that we've all been in years, right? What we found was how much the vendor satisfaction and the user experience ratings were impacted by whether or not those technologies were supporting their organizations through the challenges they were facing from the pandemic and the health crisis, right? And then following on to that, the economic challenges, right? And so we saw lots of commentary around my organization is providing the right reports I need, or my organization is helping me identify the skills I need to reassess my organization. And so that, I think, out of everything that came out of last year's data was how integral the HR technology is to surviving and actually sort of moving forward in what's happening in our global environments. And that's for today and going forward. So, yeah.
Super interesting, Stacey. Thank you for that. And we'll touch on that again later in this interview. We'll even give you the opportunity to tell people how to be part of it and where to find the survey as well in its 24th year. Go ahead, Neely.
Yeah, I think actually there's a really nice bridge there between what you said, Stacey, and what we're going to be talking about today as well, which is basically anticipative organizations, because you already touched on it a little bit, that organizations were starting to assess more what skills people needed, etc. So I think there's a nice link between the rest of our conversation. Back to you, Joe.
Yes, there totally is. So what, as Neely said, Stacey, we'd love to discuss today is kind of this concept that we're hearing more and more about from analysts and in the market around anticipatory organizations. So my understanding anyway of it is that it's about going beyond agility and actually combining it with anticipation of changes and trends to come when we're speaking about HR. So to what extent, I guess as a first opening question, Stacey, to what extent can change actually be anticipated in the workplace in 2021? You just talked about 2020, crazy year. So this whole idea of anticipation of change, can it actually be done?
Yeah, such a good question, right? I mean, I think, there's sometimes a feeling like, well, we're kind of holding on by the seat of our pants. We're barely, figuring out what's going to be tomorrow, let alone a year or two down the road. Oftentimes you'll hear organizations say, we can't plan 3 years out. We're planning 6 weeks out, 6 months out at most, right? And so I think there has been a little bit of, over the last several years, a devaluing is probably the best way to put it, of long-term planning exercises, right? Because you couldn't anticipate too often. And I think if the pandemic taught us anything, it taught us a lot of things, right? Obviously on the human front and the health front and how we as humans address each other. But it also taught us that yes, you can plan, you just have to think about it in terms of multiple scenarios, right? The idea that you can plan for an assured outcome, I think, is what we needed to get rid of. And we needed to think more in the idea of scenarios and forecasting. And so what we're seeing in the market now is people shifting from what used to be called continuity planning or continuity sort of risk management efforts, right? That sort of figuring out, if we had a major disaster, how would we keep our servers up? If we had a major disaster, how would we find all of our employees? To really thinking about a series of forecasted outcomes that might happen over a series of 3 to 4 years, and which direction or which tools would help them have the data to make the decisions they want. So it isn't even about what is happening to some extent, but do you have the data to make the decisions you need depending on what could happen? And I think that's the shift we're hearing in planning. And so I think the answer to your question is yes, we can be anticipatory organizations, but we have to think in terms of data and scenarios and less in terms of expected assured outcomes, if that makes sense.
Interesting that you mentioned that, Stacey, and that is definitely something that we've heard come up as well, the importance of data. What kind of data? Can you maybe give some examples what kind of data we should think of here?
Yeah, one of the questions we ask every year in our research is an organization doing enterprise workforce planning? And I've actually been asking that same question on my survey for 7-8 years. And even before that, when I was in other research firms, I had asked it. So 10 years ago, I did a big project on workforce planning. And at that point in time, we only saw maybe 15, 16% of the market saying, yeah, we do enterprise workforce planning. Today, it's really only up to about 26% of the market. This year, that jumped to about 32%, which is a much higher, almost like a 30% increase. And some of that was people were sort of doing planning because they were forced to because of the pandemic. But what we also, when we dug into it to find out what were they using and what was the things they needed, there was a lot of focus, as we had mentioned earlier, on skills. Like, do I have data on the skills that I have in my organization? There was a lot of focus on job roles, right? Do I know what the job roles are and what they're supposed to be doing in my organization? But the other thing that we hear when people who do enterprise workforce planning, who do it on the scenario-based model, they're also bringing in a lot of external data. So data on environmental issues, data on economic issues in their region, right? We also see a lot of benchmarking data being brought into these analysis. So compensation data we were talking about earlier, or data around the level of metrics that are being viewed by organizations in my industry from an HR perspective, right? That kind of information is just as important because it gives you a sense of what's important in your industry or in your region and what might have an impact on your internal plans. So what we always tell people is that if you're going to be doing an enterprise workforce plan, you kind of start internally. You think about your skills, you think about your job roles, you think about your business goals, what you're trying to achieve, but then you also have to think about what's the external impact. And those categories tend to be the ones that I hear people talk about most.
Yeah, really, really interesting there to hear you talk about data, Stacey, because it's a topic that's, we've done episodes specifically around that topic, but it feels like in every episode it's coming in and a sense of how much more important it is to, first of all, go back to what you're trying to achieve, what the business is trying to achieve, and then dive into that data in terms of your planning. I wanted to just focus in on this concept of agility, because agility is something we hear a lot about in HR. It seems to be a kind of a trendy topic, agile HR.
Yeah.
The whole concept of anticipatory organizations, my reading of it anyway, is that kind of agility is not enough. And you talked there about planning for multiple scenarios. But would you agree that agility by itself is no longer enough for HR?
Yeah, and I think that word has tended to be twisted a bit. So I would agree. I mean, the term agility, if you actually look at it historically, comes out of an agile programming process, right? It was a technology thing. It was the idea that you would continuously get feedback from your customers and you would sort of be working on the product in multiple stages at all times, right? And it was a great new idea about how you built technology instead of what we would traditionally call the cascading model, where you'd build a big product, get your requirements and then ship it out. And then at that point in time, you're already too late to the game and everybody's passed on to new requirements, right? So I think we've tended to take that idea that you're constantly getting feedback, constantly changing the organization. And that's what agile is. And we've warped it a little bit is a good way to put it, because change is hard and change is uncomfortable. And if you have a company where your employees and your customers can't depend on what you're offering and can't depend on what you're planning to do to some extent, so that you're always saying, okay, well, we've heard our customers and they're saying we need to change here, and we've heard our employees and they say we need to change here. That it's like whiplash inside of an organization, right? And so I think the difference is a little bit more along the lines of, I would use the term flexibility, right? We as an organization need to have room to be able to hear, to reflect, and to bend in ways that make sense for the future that we're trying to achieve, the organization's feedback that we're getting from customers, and the feedback that we're getting from employees. When you're flexible, that means you don't rearrange the ship chairs all the time. That means you have enough room where you have hours in the day for employees to think a little bit more broadly. You have time for feedback to come in and to reflect on it, which means when you're flexible, you have processes where you're continuously listening, but where you're also monitoring the outcomes of any changes that you make so that you don't make those changes too quickly. That means then that you as an organization can bend in the wind. That's what I tell people, right? You want to be more like a tree. You don't want to be like, musical chairs in an organization. And when you can bend, then that means, people who have skill sets here could be shifted over here. And you know that, but that doesn't mean that you're rearranging their lives, right? So I don't know if that helps a bit. That's how I think about it. I don't know if that helps a little bit from where you guys are hearing as well. It's what we're definitely seeing in the data.
I think so, yes. And I very much like the analogy of the tree, because not only does the tree indeed bend in the wind, but a tree keeps growing stronger as well over the years. And I think that is also something that we can definitely apply to organizations and the people within the organizations, because you said, for instance, that people that have certain skills, they can then maybe also bend a little bit and also work on a different type of projects, but they can also, of course, develop new skills, and that makes them stronger. And so if we look at the organization and all its people that like a tree a little bit, then yes, it's flexible. So that's a very nice one. But at the same time, it also grows stronger over the years, and its roots also continue to grow below the surface. So I very much like the analogy. I hope I didn't really deviate too much here from the conversation. Changing tack a little bit here, Stacey, because we found a short snippet from a recent analyst paper, HR analyst paper, actually. So I'd like to read it to you, and then, of course, we would like to hear your thoughts on that. So what it said was, organizations will continue to have to address unexpected disruptions and challenges in 2021. But many will benefit from new sources of innovation as a get-it-done mindset becomes more broadly accepted. Now, we'd like to touch on this get-it-done mindset. Do you think that there really is a new get-it-done innovation mindset spreading through companies today?
Well, I'm laughing because there's a comedian here in the United States that has a term called "get her done," right? And so we won't go there. It's not good. but I get where they're going with that. I mean, I do think that necessity is the mother of invention, and we all know that, right? And last year, we faced necessities that were life-altering and were life and death matters, right? And so I do think we had a lot of innovation last year that came to the forefront that we may not have seen for years if we hadn't been in the midst of a healthcare crisis, right? Things like technology that allowed us to sort of track and trace employee movement in an organization. That was sort of on the horizon, but I don't think it was being used quite as broadly as what we saw last year, and people sort of using it in a way that I think was more comfortable than what we'd seen coming up in the market previously, right? We definitely saw tons of technology in the market being focused on sort of really thinking about how you work from anywhere, right? And that was, VPN networks had always been part of it, but we saw lots of investments in that kind of network analysis and how do you think about the culture of working from home, which again was on the horizon, but real new innovations that came out of that. What I think though is that the get her done or the get it done model is assuming that we haven't had that, right? I think we as an industry and as a market have always had a bit of practicality to it, particularly HR, right? HR is one of the most critical organizational functions that have to be both practical and strategic at the same time, right? Finance is always, they've got sort of rules and regulations. It's very clear what they're doing. They're managed at multiple levels by different entities outside of the organization. So they're very clear on what their answer is to almost every question that they've got going on in a finance organization. Marketing is out ahead of the market generally. Your operations function is thinking about, how I get the job done today. HR has to live in two worlds. They have to be strategic and they have to be practical. And I think the practicality side has really increased. And that's probably the get it done thing that people are seeing. If I have employees who can't leave a region, but I need to get work done in another region, what's the practical side of getting that done? That makes me become innovative. That makes me think differently about how I get work done in my organization. If I have an organization that is struggling with getting customers to sort of buy products online, well, I need to take some of my employees who are focused in a retail environment and shift their focus to maybe doing marketing and tweeting and things that I know they do better because, by the way, they're more influential in the market than we are. And let's think about ways to sort of incentivize them to do that because that'll help our online sales. We've seen all that kind of innovation in ways that was brand new. And when you think, boy, yeah, we're just taking the people and sort of helping them figure out how they can get it done. I think we've always had that in HR. I just think we've oftentimes been less likely to sort of share it or think about it in a way that it's different than just getting our work done every day. I don't know if that would be my response to it.
For sure. And yeah, I love that mix. Like you painted such a clear picture there between the practical side of HR and that strategic side. And I know when the pandemic first hit, it was full on practical mode, look after people and all sorts of things like that. But now potentially coming out of it, it's putting on that strategic hat again. That's maybe a question as well, Stacey. There is like, do you feel like HR has a newly acquired more strategic role coming out of this pandemic, or is it back to what it was like before?
I think HR has an opportunity to be seen as more strategic, and this is particularly, a global conversation for me, because I think oftentimes different regions have different expectations of the HR functions depending on how HR is handled at a regional level and a compliance level and a regulatory level. And I think in this environment, HR has had more of an opportunity to share that the data, the tools, the interaction we have with employees is more critical to the organization than we've ever thought before. If HR steps back now and says, okay, we've done our job, now go ahead and let everyone else do it, I think that's HR's opportunity to lose. So I always tell people, look, you need to keep reminding people about what the last year has looked like and why the work you did had an impact on whether or not the organization survived. You need to remind people on the work that you've done and why it has helped you move into the future. And you need to remind people that if you are at the table with those strategic conversations, you can help the organization become more flexible. You can help the organization anticipate the future in ways they couldn't do without some people insight into it. So my sense is it's an opportunity for HR. Yeah.
And almost what I'm hearing is almost doing a look back on the last year and a half and saying, look how we got through it together. And
yes,
that's really cool. Keen to take more of a bird's eye view around sort of innovation and specifically how it touches on HR. So you talked there a little bit around how COVID potentially was, almost like a driver of innovation because we just had to come up with solutions to problems. Is there any other pillars or commonalities in what makes for a strategic HR department, an innovative HR department, sorry?
So innovation's a funny thing. I have a good friend who is the head of innovation of one of the largest big consulting firms. Like that's her role, Chief Innovation Officer, right? And I didn't even know those roles existed, but they do exist. There's a lot of them out there. And me and her had this conversation about what is the difference between an organization that is innovative versus one that is not. And we sort of went back and forth on, well, sometimes it's how you think about supporting innovation, which means, do you allow employees to step into things and make mistakes and pull back? Do you invest in offshoots or ways of thinking or opportunities for people to sort of raise stuff up from the bottom, right? So that's one way to be an innovative organization. I think there's a lot of research around that, and I think it's a really good. I would advocate that anyone who doesn't have a position in their organization that thinks about innovation in their organization, that they should even from the smallest organization, you should have a role. Their job is to say, okay, how do we continually address the market in an innovative way? What I do think, though, is that we oftentimes think of it as an initiative or a program or a series of exercises or another function we do elsewhere in the organization. I think in the innovation factor that we also see, and this is what my friend and I discussed, is that innovation is also a set of how decisions get made in an organization are part of the innovation conversation, right? Like do you make decisions based off of good stories, off of a lot of data, off of who knows who, right? I mean, if you're an organization that is culturally not accepting of sort of new ideas, that it's really hard to sort of say, well, we're going to do an innovative initiative if the leadership doesn't believe in that concept, right? I think the other thing about innovation is that, we oftentimes see only big new things, right? The new Apple phone, the new, technology that came out around, radio waves or whatever it is, right? The G5 or whatever it is, all those things, right? Become like that's innovation. When in reality, innovation could be, I'm a customer service rep and I've designed our process so that we've removed 4 steps from it. That's innovation, right? And I think we need to celebrate the small innovations as well as the big innovations and treat it like a continuous thing. That would be my sense of how we think differently about innovation. Is that it's a continuous improvement model to some extent. It's not exactly it, but that we appreciate the ways in which we do changes even in the small areas.
I think what's really cool here is that, at least in my opinion, when we talk about innovation and being having a bit of an innovative culture in a company, that really it is a bit of a collaboration between, on the one hand, the organization has its part to play, and then every single person working in that organization as well. So for me, it would be the organization who makes sure that the right environment has been created. So you mentioned that, Stacey, and we heard this also come up a lot. It's about, if people try something, and this can indeed be very small things, but if it goes wrong, that's okay, that, it's seen as a learning moment, and people are not afraid to try new things. People are not afraid to make mistakes because managers are very supportive. The whole environment is supportive. So that's one thing. And I think each of us has their role to play as well, because that's more about us being curious and wanting to try new things, and always thinking about how could we maybe do things differently, or how could we, try something in a different manner. So I think that's the beauty of it, actually, that it's both the organization as a whole, but it's also every single individual within that organization. At least that's how I think about it. I don't know what you both think about that.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right, Neely. I mean, that's what I mean by this whole idea that we've got to kind of celebrate the big stuff and the little stuff, right? This year, we're getting ready to launch a new Ford truck, which is one of the largest 150 trucks selling in the market, right? Like, has billions of dollars in sales. And the changes they've made to that truck around being an electric vehicle have made it a more powerful vehicle than if it were gas combusted, right? And those changes were small initial changes when they first started to do it. Now it's going to be a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it was because of small incremental changes they were making to that truck on an ongoing basis. So I think you're right. Like, we've really got to think about the fact that innovation comes in a lot of different sizes, right?
In the sense that innovation, actually, it's about these incremental changes that seem small, but one after the other over time leads to something big.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a great example.
Yeah, so Stacey, we're kind of wrapping up already our conversation, but something we really like to do on our podcast, The Ins and Outs of Work, is we really like to ask our guests if they have a particular challenge that they would like to leave our listeners with. So that's my question to you.
New challenge. Can it be? Is it work related or anything? Right. Well,
it doesn't have to be. Yes.
Yeah. I wish I could say that I had a lot of things that I do outside of work, but I don't. Really, work is kind of my passion. So here's my challenge to the HR community. Let your voice be heard, and some of this comes back to the fact that I constantly do research, and you'll see that we have sort of a tagline this year called "The Voice of HR." But whether you take a survey, or whether you make sure that you share your insights with your organization, or whether you share your insights with your vendor communities, right? I think the biggest thing that we can do in the market today is share our feedback in one way or another. We have to say, look, nothing will change without us voicing our opinion. That's just a given in the world that we live in today. To assume that someone else is working on something, to assume that someone else is, going to make the change you want to see without your involvement is not something I think that we can depend on any longer. As a community of HR professionals, as a community of employees, as a community of vendors, whatever community you feel you're part of, make sure you're involved in it. Make sure you're getting into the associations. Make sure you're getting involved in places where you can share your insight and share your feedback, and make sure people are hearing it. So that would be my challenge to everyone, is give feedback. You have a voice. Everybody has a voice, and we need to make it heard today, particularly in the world that we live in right now. So
yes. Brilliant, Stacey. Such a great challenge, and one that fits with all of our listeners. Don't just sit on the sidelines. Get involved, share your feedback, and shape tomorrow. That's so cool. Brilliant, Stacey. Well, we wanted to finally just come back to your research, the 24th annual this year HR Systems Survey. If people would like to participate in this year's survey, where can they find out more and where can they participate?
Yes, we should definitely, if you have an interest in participating, or if you even want to download the aggregate report that we give away for free with the research, you can find all that on www.sapientinsights.com. You can also find it if you go find me on LinkedIn. You can connect with me, and I have a link right there as well on my LinkedIn site. Also, just to let everyone know, if you participate, you do get sort of a mini benchmark. You get all the data back from the aggregate report, and you get to be part of the community. So it is an important thing, I think, that people realize that we are really trying to reach out, particularly to the global community. We increased our international data set by 30% last year. It was 30% of our overall data, and it was 30% from the previous year. We really want to make sure that we have a good view that we can share back to the market. And so, would be happy if anybody has any questions to also answer them, or if they want to connect with me on LinkedIn about it. We think that it's something that is valuable to the community. So thanks for giving me a chance to talk about it. I really appreciate it.
Brilliant. Well, it's a pleasure, Stacey. And we'll include links to the things you mentioned there, to your LinkedIn and your website in the show notes if you're listening along on the podcast networks today. Otherwise, this has been a fantastic conversation, right, Neely? It's been so interesting.
Definitely, Joe. Absolutely. From my side too, Stacey, thank you so much for joining us. And to our listeners, as always, if you haven't done so yet, please do subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Share it with a friend, and please do leave us a review, because Joe and I really appreciate it. So thank you so much, and bye.